Hello and welcome to ConTinual. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight we're going to be talking about one of the great American myths, the legend of Sleepy Hollow, in all of its forms, and most especially its two most popular modern forms, the 1990s movie by Tim Burton and the TV show featuring Tom Mison and Natalie Beharry, and for a brief and wonderful moment in time, Orlando Jones and John Cho. So before we get started in that discussion, I'm going to ask my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their work, starting with Hansi.
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. My company is Squee Projects, and I'm an oral historian, a documentarian, and now I'm writing essays. So I'm an all-around artist and creative person.
Great. Well, that's cool. Wish I had more time to delve into that. I interview in another life. Anyway, Jeannie.
Hey, I'm Jeanne Adams. I write urban fantasy, paranormal romantic suspense, and space adventure with my friend Nancy Northcott.
Great. Beth.
Yeah, I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal cozy mysteries and romantic urban fantasy, and I love ghost stories and urban legends.
Of which Sleepy Hollow is definitely one. Whether or not you believe that the residents had ghost stories before our boy, who I'm blanking on. Okay.
Washington Irving.
Washington Irving,
Right.
yes, a government employee, and I'm blanking on his name. Yeah. Washington Irving, who was a government employee, got a hold of it. So anyway, Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Mulligan. I'm a horror movie podcaster, filmmaker, and I had my first book, Realm, published by Falstaff Books last year.
Congratulations. Okay. And Susan.
I am Susan Griffith. I'm one half of the Clay and Susan Griffith writing team. We write historical fantasy, including the Vampire Empire series, Crown and Key, The Flash, and the Arrow books from, I think it was CW. So, and, just a wide plethora of short stories, comic books, whatever.
Nice.
Yeah. All sorts of varied fiction. Both original and tie-in. So that's really cool. And all of this is cool, by the way, guys. So, everybody's read the Washington Irving story, right? Mm-hmm. It struck me that the hero of that is actually Brom. And yet all of the newer versions, they make Ichabod the central character. And the nice guy and all of that. So what do you think prompted that shift from the text, if you will, to Ichabod? So, Susie, you want to start us off?
Good question. It's been a long time since I've actually read the short story. So I will say that I wrote it like in college, maybe even high school. But I don't know, I think Ichabod, I remember when I first saw it, I actually saw the cartoon from Disney first. And it was very focused much on the character of Ichabod in this. And he wasn't the heroic sort that you see in everything since then. It's more cowardly. And I think the other character, Ron, I don't know, I think maybe he was just too dynamic. I'm not sure why they focused on Ichabod, but he was the very gangly person, and I think maybe he was just more of a comedic thing, at least for Disney at the time, where they thought that it would be more interesting to throw someone in there versus, who was a little bit more scholarly, nerdy, which wasn't popular at the time, but certainly was more comedic at the time. And maybe that could be one of the reasons that it was going in
the
that
Disney
direction.
cartoon was pretty close to the parameters of the story, because Ichabod is described as this gangly guy who is very popular with the ladies because he's the center of all gossip. Yeah. And he helps them with their children, and he's a teacher. But, it's really interesting to watch how it morphed from the Disney to the modern iterations. And Jeannie, do you have any idea what might have caused that transition?
Well, in many respects, Brahm is definitely the hero, but he's also a little bit the villain because he's kind of the one who pulls the prank in the first place. And that makes him less than likable in some ways. He's kind of like Gaston from Beauty and the
Yes.
Beast,
Yeah,
where
that's true.
he's the swaggering dude, right? But he's kind of a two-dimensional person in that respect. And I think Ichabod comes off as the far more interesting, if not necessarily more likable, far more interesting. And in terms of the pranks and stuff, definitely more likable because he's not out to hurt anybody or bully anyone. And Brahma's he edges
He's
into
bully.
that bully territory. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that Ichabod is just a far more thoroughly drawn and three-dimensional character. And he's kind of the underdog. And I think one of the things Disney is really good at is picking stories from the, spectrum of stories, 101 Dalmatians, Ichabod Crane, all that, where they can really play up the underdog. Even Steamboat Willie is the underdog, right?
Yeah.
So I think it shifts and morphs to where he's much more interesting. I mean, like the Tim Burton version, I don't think Brahm is even mentioned.
Nope.
And he's much more comedic too. Like Johnny Depp is a much more comedic than Tom Meissen was.
Yeah. He harkens more back to the original story in terms of being a coward and being like,
clumsy,
don't touch things, and clumsy and wigged out by stuff and fainting, and but the Tom Meissen character is far more heroic and far more. In many respects, it's a twist on the story that's far more interesting. Whereas he doesn't have, he's smoking hot. He's not gangly and awkward. So
he's skinny, but that's not necessarily gangly. But Hansi, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really am just like Ichabod. That's like I was there for Ichabod. That was just so great, and I love the movie too. But they've added all these other supernatural elements, and in fact, like I think the series was overwhelmed because they just added way too many, 72 demons, and we got
sin eaters.
It sort of fell under the weight. And the movie, although it could have done that, it was more contained, of course, because it's a movie, so they kept it. But it also kind of the magic stuff got kind of
I was just seeing it as a thread of why did somebody pick out Ichabod? And I have a thought of it, and I'm just wondering if anybody else might have had the same thought. Bill?
Well, I grew up in upstate New York. This was our thing.
Local.
Yeah. And I grew up in the Hudson Valley specifically. So my parents even
did I.
What
really? The hell?
Really?
Wow.
What? Saugerties, New York.
Oh, you kidding me? I was in Malden on the Hudson.
Oh, wow.
Right next door to Saugerties. I went to Saugerties High School. Holy crap.
All right. So when I say upstate New York, I'm talking about 90% of New York. Anything north of New York City is considered upstate New York.
Yes, it is.
By any rights, I live in southern New York, but no, it's upstate. The capital, Albany. Nobody knows that. So this, of course, we were force fed this at a very early age, and I like the story just fine. I never thought of Braun as a hero. I didn't like Ichabod.
Girl.
Yes. So did Hitler. I mean, so what? He was a bully. He was the kind of kids who would pick on me in school, but Ichabod didn't really strike me. He was so superstitious. I wasn't. I like the Headless Horseman. I've always liked the monsters, and he was a cool monster. He was a good visual monster, and the Disney cartoon really played that up. Disney cartoons were not my favorite. I could not give a fig for Mickey Mouse. I love Bugs Bunny. I didn't think any of the Disney cartoons were especially funny, but they were technically sound. They were really well animated and visually good. They just didn't really, usually it didn't go for them, but I thought that was excellent. I think that's what Disney should have stuck more to. Wind in the Willows, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. They really could do those shorts extremely well. And it was very cool. I love the Tim Burton movie. I'm not super familiar with the TV show, so I'm going to be learning a lot about that from listening to you guys.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's a cool story. It's got a great monster, and it does have that, you know, hometown feel to it.
I think that's the one thing that's consistent is the monster in all the stories. Maybe the only consistent thing.
Well, yeah, you know, the pumpkin head, the guy without a head of his own, the horse that rears dramatically against a moonlit sky. It's a wonderful image. Anyway, it's very visual. Beth, why do you think that, you know, this switch from this, you know, Brahm being the lad who was full of mischief but had no harm in him, as Irving describes him, to you know, Ichabod? You know, why the shift that brought him in and made him the focus? Well, he was always kind of the focus, and the hero as opposed to the object of fun.
I think Ichabod is good because he is the outsider in every iteration. In Washington Irving's story, he is the traveling teacher. In the Tim Burton film, he's the investigator. And then, of course, in the TV show, he's this guy that's coming back from the dead 200 years later. And so we, as the audience, we get to explore this world with him. And it's new to us, just as it's new to Ichabod. And so he's not used to the way of life in Sleepy Hollow. He's not used to the traditions and the legends and the superstitions. And so I think he just makes a great vehicle to take us on that journey as viewers and readers.
And also offer a callback to the other famous legend that shows up in the same volume as the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Rip Van Winkle, because the sleeper awakened, as it were. You know, let's talk a little bit about
what was your thought about it, Jeanne Marie?
My thought was that all of these things are written by nerds. And he's the nerdiest character in the whole piece, you know. I agree with the outsider. He allows us to see things through the audience's eyes, you know, to be the audience, as Beth says, to be the audience's entry into the supernatural world. But it occurred to me that, you know, as our culture has gotten nerdier, that the hero is not the big guy who can, you know, plow 3 furrows and has mischief in his soul, but has no harm in him and plays a great prank. To the guy who, you know, learned a trade of the mind, teacher, and, you know, he knows all this stuff. He lists. Not the other thing is he listens to the women and helps them with their kids. Oh, obviously a beta male. And so, you know, not something the young nation was very fond of. But as we got forward in the 20th century, the various things that put him back became pluses, you know. Oh, this is our resident nerd. He's just like me, the writer. Whether it be, you know, whatever the gender of the writer happens to be, I wouldn't be writing if I wasn't a nerd. So, you know, that was my thought. But
and these days it's cool to be a nerd.
Exactly. Right. It's much cooler, you know.
About time.
Because, you know, as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs taught us, nerds rule the world. So they are the heroes, or at least the cutting edge of whatever, you know, we're doing at the moment. Okay, Beth, you've seen, Bill, you haven't seen the movie, but everybody else has pretty much seen the Tim Burton movie. Okay.
Oh, I've seen the movie, not the
TV
show.
Watch the show.
Oh, the show. Okay, then we're good. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, to me, the movie kind of jettisoned most of the, you know, they kept the idea of Ichabod comes in, Ichabod has to deal with this situation, but the situation is completely different than, you know, what did you feel? I mean, was it a surprise when you saw that? Was it something you could groove on? how did you feel about that completely? Why, this is way different than anything that's gone before.
So Christopher Walken as the Hessian was right.
Yeah.
Aces.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So Beth,
Yeah, go ahead.
Beth?
I mean, I love it. I'm a huge Tim Burton fan, and I can just about recite that movie word for word. And I think what I like about it is, especially as it delves into, witchcraft and kind of brings that into it. I mean, look at that area of the country at that time period. Witchcraft would have been a big thing. I mean, we had, the Salem witch trials, and obviously there were a lot of superstitions surrounding witchcraft. So I think that Tim Burton made a good move by playing into that. And I think from a historic perspective, it fits well, even though obviously the supernatural elements are way, way, way into fantasy territory.
I like the agency of the lead. It wasn't Drew Barrymore. Who was it that played
Christina Ricci?
Christina Ricci. The fact that she had about as much agency as anybody in that particular thing.
Besides the villainess, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
There is always a literary and a narrative virtue to being evil. So, what were your first thoughts on it, Jeanne? I mean, the movie.
Oh.
Was it a surprise? Was it, oh yeah, this is my thing, or was it, oh my God, they got that wrong?
I'm like Beth. I'm a big Tim Burton fan. There's really not much he's done that I don't like. And I liked the take. I especially loved the last line, as the Bronx is up and the battery's down. I was like, well, let's just go straight into a musical number, shall we? And I loved that Ichabod was more like the traditional Ichabod of being awkward and somewhat cowardly. And as I think you pointed out, Beth, he's the outsider. And everybody else is sort of in cahoots, even if we don't know it when the story starts. And we begin to realize that, the preacher and the, innkeeper and everybody and the undertaker, they're all in cahoots. We find out one by one which ones are in cahoots, but you don't really know. One of the things I really liked is that because I am a writer and I write this stuff, a lot of times I figure this shit out like that. And I didn't quite get that the stepmother was our origin story until just about the time that Burton, I figured out a little bit before Burton begins the reveal, but not too much before that. So that was really fun for me, because I don't know if y'all have this, but once you really start writing a lot, you begin to see the twists and turns, and you begin to unravel the stories. And reading is still wonderful and fun, but it's not the immersive pleasure that it could have been before you began to be a writer. And so I really like that. I loved Christopher Walken as the bad guy. And whoever, I don't know if it was Walken or not, but whoever did the body movements of the Hessian, of the Headless Horseman without his head, you get visual from Walken once he's got his head back on, of course, but whoever did the physical drama of the horseman as the body, and I've never looked that up, has never occurred to me to look it up.
His name is either Ray Parks or Ray Parker. He was the one who was Darth Maul. Ray Park, yeah, Ray Park.
Wow,
brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant.
That's cool.
And that was one thing I was surprised about, Jeanne Marie, is just how much they managed to convey in this dark clad, creature with no freaking facial expressions. They managed to convey so much through physical body language of his anger, his despair, his orders, his, okay, we're doing it, and I loved that aspect of it. I wasn't totally, once I was on board with the fact that he's now an investigator rather than, the teacher, but he still had all those awkward wonderfulnesses that come from the original story. I was all in. It didn't surprise me. I was along for the ride. And every time it's on the TV, I'm like mesmerized. I have to stay and watch it.
Yeah, it's a pity that Johnny Depp has become so problematic.
Yeah,
Because he was
it
the
really is.
prettiest thing in the world in that
Mm.
movie. Yes, I am shallow.
Although
I am
him and
sorry.
Tim Burton could use a timeout, like
Yeah.
from each other. They
Yes,
just
yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hansi, what are your thoughts on this one?
I loved it because to me it was Tim Burton doing a Hammer homage. You know,
Yes.
he
Yeah.
had Christopher Lee in it. So,
Mhm.
and I'm a huge Hammer geek and Amicus and all that stuff. So for him to be playing with that world, with that look, was just beautiful to me. The costumes were beautiful.
Mhm.
The story doesn't really mean much to me. It's just a bunch of people doing stuff, but everybody looked great doing it.
They did. The
Susan,
stepmother
what-
had the coolest gowns.
Oh,
my
yeah.
Yes,
God.
she did. Oh
All
my
the
gosh.
Hey, yeah, some of those 90s movies, the story may have been variable, but the set design and the costume design, I mean,
And
Francis
Tim
Ford
Burton.
Coppola's
Mhm.
Dracula, for example.
Yeah.
I have
The
been
movie was a mess, but oh my God.
The
They look
costume.
trying to
great.
figure out.
Very pretty to look at.
Yes.
I was trying to figure out the Sophie Frost costume, you know, the Lucy
Yeah.
Wet burial, because it is
Yeah.
amazing if I can figure out how to make that.
I noticed very few people actually want to do Dracula with the sticky buns. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It's so cool. He looked amazing.
But anyway, Susan, what about you, you know, in the movie and did
Yeah,
it
I mean, I came in with low expectations. With I loved because I came in with this because again, it was like all the others, Tim Burton. I knew the story wasn't going to be very well adhered to, but I wanted to see where it went, and it went into like a murder mystery, and I wasn't expecting that at all. And when they started throwing in the magic and the witches and the supernatural, I was in because I was, a monster buff. I was the old style horror, which again, this was very reminiscent of versus the slasher films that you get now, which I had no interest in. But, I came in for the monster, and I wound up getting sucked into the characters and the stories, but both from the little kid that Ichabod befriended and was getting information from to Christina Ricci's character. All of it, I was surprised to see all these new layers too, and I had no problem with that. I was a big Headless Horseman fan as a monster. That was one of my top monsters when I was growing up. I even did a wood cutout to put on the barn of a Headless Horseman, and my mother's going, "Why? Why is there this horrible monster on our wall?" And
You're my hero.
All I have in New York is Chud.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
Well, you
But it
do
was
have
really
alligators, the
Mhm.
albino alligators in the
Yeah.
sewers.
Giant rats,
Eating the chuds.
Eat the rat. Yeah.
which I did see once. I did see a giant rat. I thought it was a dog. So my
Oh,
sister
God.
dragged me away. But
Yeah.
anyway, the monster was my lead in. But I stayed for everything else. They did such a great job. We've already talked about Christopher Walken's performance. Did fantastic. I actually did like Christina Ricci's. That was I think the first time I was exposed to her. I don't know if she had done the Adams Family or anything
Yeah, she had
before
already
that.
done that. Yeah.
She had around that, or maybe I did see her from that. So it's my second exposure to her, and I wound up really liking what she did with the character. She became sympathetic, which I wasn't expecting, because usually at that point, sometimes they weren't really focusing on female characters, but she wound up having a huge part in that, which I really appreciated. And Johnny Depp is Johnny Depp. I mean, he's always who he is, and I love him for in his early days. His early days are spotless. And I like that, like everyone else said, that he was more of the nerdy outsider, which is an important element to it. And I'm glad they kept that.
Yeah, one of his, I forget what the two characters, because he used to do, he used to base his characters on one person or another, like his character in Pirates of the Caribbean owed a lot to Keith Richard. Yes.
Sure.
That's
Totally.
right. That's right. Yeah.
And I believe in this one there were hints of Pepe Le Pew. So, but I'm not sure. I
I had
probably
not heard
have
that.
all the characters wrong. But anyway, Bill, could you tell us about your thoughts
Oh,
on this movie, and whether was it shock to see the different direction, that, oh my God,
mhm.
Sleepy Hollow as a Hammer film with all that
Yeah.
entails.
Well, I mean, the short story is pretty short. There's no
Yeah.
way if you stretch that out, it's not going to be interesting. I like the fact that they made him, instead of being the most superstitious person in the town, he was the skeptic.
Yeah.
You know, he's the Scully who comes in here and is going to explain everything. And of course, we know he's wrong, and it's just a matter of what it'll take to figure it out. I think this movie is brilliantly cast. Hansi's right. It reminds me of a Hammer film, and those wonderful British actors who are just so good. It also reminds me a lot of my favorite director, who's Mario Bava. The film Black Sunday.
Oh
There's
my God.
Oh, okay.
the whole sequence where
Barbara Steele.
yeah, Lisa Marie doing the Barbara Steele and the Iron
Yes.
Maiden, and where they find that little boy who his whole life he's growing up, people like, you look like a really young Tim Burton. And he's like, well, so yeah, and of course Tim Burton is always, I think the reason why Johnny Depp works so well is Tim Burton looks at Johnny Depp and it's like, this is me if I were popular when I when I was young. So
And
sure,
pretty, yeah.
he found his muse. Oh,
Yeah.
look at that good boy.
Such a
Oh,
good boy.
I really love
He likes
this.
Sleepy Hollow too.
The other thing about it is that it's really gory, but it's not
It is.
spirited gore.
No.
And so I have no problem like having my grandkids watch this with me, because it's a good spooky story. Yeah, people do get their heads lopped off, and maybe that's a bit much, but it's not the it's not the in your face gross head lopping. I don't know how he did it, quite
It's like
frankly.
comic
He's just-
book
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
kind of
He did it
violence
after the
and
comic book,
gore.
yes.
So
Yeah.
if you take some Hammer, you take some Mario Bava, you mix in some of Roger Corman's Poe stories for AIP, and you get this wonderful homage with, as you mentioned, just brilliant set design, costumes. It looks like it's shot on a stage, which
Yeah.
just gives it a look that you don't get any other way. It's a really pretty film. It's just one of those that every time I watch it, I like it more than I did before. I've always liked it, but just watching it again a couple of days ago, it's like, I really like this.
Yeah.
And I love Christina Ricci in this. It's a different role for her. She's usually, has the reputation of being the kind of goth sort of thing.
Mhm.
And here it's a completely
Blonde
different
and-
thing. She's
And
very
white.
good in this. And
Yeah.
I think, has she ever had a bad performance?
I can't.
And yet I don't think she gets the recognition she deserves, even
No,
when she sometimes she puts in a great performance, but it's in a movie that has another great performance, like Monster,
I was just
where
thinking
she was
that.
completely,
She's amazing.
yeah, it was hard to even notice anyone else in the movie when you have Charlize Theron doing that amazing job there.
And
But
Werner,
Ricci is really, really good and
Mhm.
deserves credit.
Yeah, and unfortunately, she's usually cast in supporting roles as opposed to the central role, or even the central
Yeah.
female role.
Although
And
you could make an argument, there's a lot of longevity in being a good secondary role.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're the star, stars tend to flare out. And there comes a point where if you're not the star you were, they don't even ask you for anything, because they're not going to put the person who used to be the big box office person in a role they'd be perfectly good at, because they feel like they would saturate it or just draw too much attention away from the story. But she'll be working as long as she wants to.
and her, her performance as Wednesday ended up, putting her in Wednesday. So like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
even her childhood performances are iconic.
Yes, they are. They definitely are. Okay, well, we've sort of talked about, the Tim Burton movie. One could go on, obviously,
sure.
about the Tim Burton movie and talk about that. But the most recent iteration is the TV series that ran on Fox for 3 seasons. And I confess, when it started, yes, I went for Tom Mison, stayed for Natalia Bahari, John Cho, and Orlando Jones, and then they sort of crapped it up. But that's just my view of the story, the series.
No, that's what happened.
It's the truth.
I think you're going to get consensus on that.
Oh yeah.
For those of you who went to see, who watched the series, I know, Bill, you're sort of off the hook on this. You're going to be learning, and please.
Yeah, I'm very interested in hearing.
Yeah, please throw in questions from time to time. What drew you to what encouraged you to see the series? Was it the movie? Was that the thing that had you giving it a view? What did you, why did you keep watching, and was there anything at any point that turned you off? So I'm going to start with Hansi on this one. So I'm sure you have opinions.
Not me. Yeah, I think it actually went 4 seasons, but I only lasted 2 because once Abby was gone, and Orlando was gone, and John Joe was gone.
Everybody was gone.
It was just a bunch of white people, and it's like the charm of it was the chemistry those Abby and Tom, or Abby and Ichabod had, and once and it was she had her own agency. She was a great character.
She was Scully.
Oh, she was fantastic.
She was cynical, but she also had a history, and
yeah, I saw her as sort of Scully to Ichabod's Fox Mulder. Only this particular Fox Mulder had proof that it was out there. So yeah.
Yeah, so she's much more, willing to believe it because she's been seeing things her whole life. So she just denied them. And then the whole thing with the cop that died.
Clancy Brown's character. Yeah.
Actor who's in a million things. What's his name?
Clancy Brown.
Clancy Brown.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes. And that he knew what was going on, and he had the files and all this stuff. So there was a lot of potential, I think, in the first season, especially. And then I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it seemed like they just were going off in all sorts of directions.
Beth,
was this one of those things where they changed showrunners? And
yes, I think they did.
Well, I think that what happened was that there was the lead actress was gone for a while. She had an autoimmune disease, and so she was offset. And so they started having more issues with her coming back, and it was just a big mire. And then they started making changes that were ridiculous in terms of, because we had some really great script writers. Even in season 2, we had Jose Molina, who worked on Firefly and Agent Carter. There was some great people, writing for it, but for some reason there was decisions being made that basically just whitewashed a lot of it. And what made it so good was taken out piece by piece by piece. And as each piece went, it got less and less interesting. They totally ruined the dynamics that made the show what it was, which this was the characters from Jenny, the sister of Abby, to Abby and Ichabod, to Orlando Bloom's character, and all the characters that were it was a show you would have never seen or would have thought to have seen at that time in its life. It was full of diverse characters, full of just really great concepts, like talks about slavery, talk about the Revolutionary War. All those incredible elements were there, and then suddenly people either, I don't know if not the showrunners, but the producers started feeling uncomfortable that all that stuff slowly started just going away, and it was sad. It lost its way, and I know it was not I can't imagine it was the actors who were making those decisions.
Actors have no.
Are they ever?
No.
Well, I heard that Natalie Behari said that she was treated much differently than Tom when he was ill.
Yes, that was the whole thing.
Yeah,
and that's what started it.
Yeah.
And he was supportive of her. It wasn't that he was trying it. It was just
Yeah, no, decisions above
bigwigs.
their pay grade. Yeah.
Mhm.
Beth, you had a particularly bad experience with, the lead into all of this. But let's start with the good stuff. What drew you to the series? And
Other than Tom Mason,
good, I'm
Enough.
not the only one.
Oh, you're not the only one.
I mean, look, I write paranormal cozy mysteries. I love mysteries. I love lore. I love all those paranormal elements. And so when I heard about the show coming out, it was instantly like, oh yeah, this is right up my alley. I mean, I'm an X-Files fan, a Supernatural fan. I mean, Buffy, all of those things.
Sure.
And for me, I was like, well, this show has the potential to fall right in line with all of those kinds of things. And for season one, it did. Season one was absolutely outstanding. And I loved the world building that they were doing and how even some of our secondary characters had these interesting threads that we could tug on a little bit in different episodes. And then, like Susan was saying, I feel like in season two, to me, it's almost like they tried to go too big too soon. Like, I understand that for a show to have longevity, you have to build out the lore and you have to expand that world, but it's almost like they added too much too quickly and it just got muddled and confusing, and they lost that interpersonal magic that the characters had in season one.
Yeah, I think it has that supernatural feel. To me, it was like the precursor to Supernatural. It was a testing ground of what Supernatural eventually became, because they did it, they had all the elements and yet they lost their way. Because they had great character relationships, they had great writers.
I'm telling you, don't fire Orlando Jones. Every time they do, the show goes downhill. Like,
yeah.
He's the coal mine canary, huh? Yeah. So,
did Sleepy Hollow come out before Supernatural or after
yeah.
Supernatural?
No, before.
No, 2013.
Was it the same?
The show is 2013.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It seems much longer ago. Don't ask me why.
Seriously,
but then again,
does.
everything before 2020 seems like so far away. So, but Beth, you got a spoiler, really.
My spoiler story, y'all. Okay, so I started watching Sleepy Hollow, loved it, big fan. And at the time, I was living in Atlanta, and I was a volunteer at Historic Oakland Cemetery, which, if you ever go to Atlanta, beautiful cemetery, absolutely worth a visit. But I was doing my volunteer shift one day, and the director of the cemetery came in and he said, Beth, they're filming a scene from Sleepy Hollow here today. The crew just finished setting up. You should go check it out before you head home. And so I walked out to the section of the cemetery they're using for the scene, and there's this big, huge headstone that says, Abby Mills, she bore witness. And I was like, oh, well, she's going to die. It was like, oh, I was so disappointed because it was only, we were only partway through that season.
Yeah.
And so it was still months before, they killed her off. And I was so just devastated. And I was like, well, I mean, I was excited that I got to see the film set, but really, really upset about what the set was.
Seriously, that would have devastated me.
That's a great story.
Yeah, that's just awful,
Yeah.
And
I was very sad.
Yeah.
But I took a picture anyways. And then, of course, I couldn't share the picture until after that episode had aired.
I don't know how you kept that secret.
Yeah, of course. Now, Jeannie, I know that you have a rather interesting perspective on the entire show.
Well, I have a major pet peeve.
Yes.
So, like everybody, I loved the first season. I bought in immediately. I love the chemistry and dynamic between Abby and Ichabod. I still laugh about the scene where she brings him a donut and he gets the receipt and he goes, 7% tax. For less.
Exactly.
And all the way the writers worked in the history, and there are a lot of shows where the first season is good and it's good enough that they pick it up for a second season and then it really starts to pick up steam. Sleepy Hollow seemed to do the opposite.
Yep.
It was really great. It was stellar in that first season and I had such high hopes for it. And I would argue that maybe the first 4 or 5, shows in the second season still had some of that energy.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, this is not quite what first season was, but it's still got the energy. It's still good. And then I'm like, really? Really? We're going there? But my big pet peeve is that they made the entire thing really spooky by having these, backlit night scenes with Spanish moss in the tree.
Yeah.
And I'm
Not
like,
big update, no.
it just jerked me right out of the story because I'm like, Hudson Valley, New York gets really cold. You can't grow Spanish moss in the Hudson Valley of New York.
I can attest to
it's
this.
Great for atmosphere, let me tell you. It's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
spooky. But yeah, that's sort of my big pet peeve. But no, I mean, I hated how they literally de-diversified the cast in season 2. I'm like, really? And they had so much going for it. And I think that the writers, as Susan points out, they had some great writers. And I think the writers and Meissen and some of the other characters really tried to keep the wagon going.
Yeah.
But I mean, the guy he played the Sin Eater. He also plays on
John Noble.
yes.
Noble.
Is it his character?
Good job.
They have his character come in the beginning, and I think it's like the last episode of season 1 or first episode of season 2, and then they completely about face his character in the next season. I'm like,
yeah,
really? It so fell apart. The wheels came off the wagon, and I gave up about 3/4 of the way through season 2, and I kept thinking I'll go back and watch. And then I would hear, like Beth was saying, like I didn't hear spoilers like Beth did, but I would hear people complaining. It's like, do I really want to go see it if I would complain too? No, I have other things to do.
You were smart. It was a torturous ride.
So I would watch the first season again in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But stop right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
There's a couple episodes in season 2, but then that's pretty much. I love the one where they go back in time.
Yes.
And I think that was even season 2 somewhere.
It's like the 4th episode of season 2.
Yeah, and that was like perfect. Where they have to deal with slavery, that he's that she's has to become a slave at that point to get through the ruse of the period, and she's like stunned by what what she has to experience and what her people are what people are experiencing at the time. That was a perfect show. And
they really balanced it so well with him having an absolutely brilliant understanding now of what that meant and what it means in the future, and him having to literally, you can see it, he does it so well. He has to think about acting as if he is still in that time place where he's now experienced a whole different reality of modern times, right? I thought they played that brilliantly. Beautiful writing, magnificent acting.
Yep. Yeah. So there are a few, but they're few and far between. But I think
then they go away entirely.
Yeah, and they're gone. But I was only in it for his flip of the coat and his bow. He could have done that every single episode, and I would not have been more pleased with what he did.
Yeah, I was always hoping for a back view on that.
We almost got it with the whole Jeanne episode where he was changing jeans all the time because she was making him try and change his clothes because they were period pieces, and he wouldn't get them dry cleaned because he didn't understand what that was. So she was trying to get new clothes on him. And the whole skinny Jeanne thing was hilarious. I was like,
that was hilarious.
Just do it. Spin. No, okay.
Okay. Well,
are we in fanfiction now? What happened?
Yeah, so I would so write fan fiction based on that show. I so would.
Yeah,
I would have. I should have.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Well,
I thought Abby was awesome.
Yes, she was.
Yeah,
she was the best.
She had agency. She was smart. She was the investigator.
She was
and
never
a really
the damsel
interesting
in distress.
Story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. She was never the damsel in distress.
Never the damsel in distress. And that was so refreshing.
Quantico, right?
Yeah.
Before all the falls apart.
And Ichabod was actually in the traditional role of being the damsel in distress.
Yes.
Yeah.
In some ways, yeah.
Having to be rescued. And while they never portrayed him as sort of the awkward, cowardly, original Washington Irving Ichabod Crane, you still got that sense of him because he was a man out of time, that there were a lot of awkwardnesses and befuddlement, not because he wasn't a smart person, but because he was that man out of time. And truly, as Beth had put it earlier, like the major outsider, because he's literally from another place in time.
And
Exactly.
where, not another place in time that meant that the world is another place. Even Tarrytown is just like, no, this is I'm a stranger in a strange land. Okay, we're coming up.
Doesn't he talk about like inventing the Tea Party? And then he says something. She says like the Tea Party. He goes, yeah, we didn't call it a celebration at the time.
There was such clever writing. I mean, there was really some really sharp writing in that first season and a little bit in the second with some of the writers. They had the humor down pat. It worked so well for the fish out of water to be learning all the new things that were modern. That stuff was spot on, perfect all the time. They could have, that was their formula. That's what they should have stuck with, and just thrown in, just have those two interact, do some weird stuff like, X-Files, and then just go. And yet it just, once Katrina became the third party, like why? We knew what we wanted. We had Abby and Ichabod, and they kept trying to throw Katrina at us. I'm like, no, we don't want her. She's a third wheel. Get rid of her. And
being a fantasy TV show, if you will, nobody has to stay dead.
Right.
She was the damsel in distress that got so annoying. I was like,
the supernatural guys died every week. I mean, come on.
Yeah, just about. Okay, we're coming up against the end of the hour. Unfortunately, we obviously have some thoughts here. So considering that my last question is, considering that Sleepy Hollow is an American myth and it will keep evolving, if you will, I'm going to ask folks to basically give me their 25 or 30 word abstract of what they think should come next. And I'm going to start with you, Bill. Yeah, I'm evil.
I think the movie is as good as it's ever going to be. I see no reason to go back to that. But it sounds like it sounds like my mission now is to watch the first season of Sleepy Hollow and then convince my wife that that's when it got canceled, and not even bother with any of the other seasons.
Wise move. Yeah.
There's only one season. Yeah.
Only one season.
That's it. It's just who knows.
Too bad.
If is it possible for them to get the old crew back? I mean, or is it? Would it be possible to get them back for a movie like we did with Firefly? Is there some way that they could bring them back?
Possible,
right?
Just timing.
I don't know. Orlando Jones might be pretty bitter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of them would be in that regard. But if they get the right people in the right group, maybe they'd come back.
I really need to look up what happened, because it always amazes me when you have something that isn't broke, but they feel obligated to fix it, and then they ruin it, and you're just why?
Right. Me too. It's like, I don't understand. Like, you have fans. You have, like, they had huge numbers for that show.
Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, it's usually inequality in pay.
Yep. Partially that, and just some very poor decision making on the upper.
All sorts of others that were going on.
Yeah. Susan, what should the next evolution of the myth be?
It's not what I would want, but I know what probably will happen, because this is the way it all goes, is the hero will now be the Headless Horseman. That's what's going to happen.
Played by Christopher Walken, I'd be there.
I know. It's coming. At some point, they're going to flip it, and he'll become the hero, and Ichabod will be the villain, and all responsible for what has happened, and he's going to get his head in all things. He'll get the girl and ride off with his fancy horse.
I think she's absolutely right. If they can make a movie about Cruella de Vil where somehow the Dalmatians were the bad guys, anything is possible.
Thank you. That is the trend. They're going to do it. I guarantee.
Hated that.
Hated it. Despised it. I didn't even like the Maleficent one, even though I love Maleficent. and I'm a huge Maleficent fan, but the
Mhm.
fact that they kept
Right.
trying to tease that little thread, and they've done it with Wicked, and it's coming. It's going to happen. It's too big a franchise in the mythology world in the myth and legend world for them not to play with it.
Well,
So
and they
it'll
really
happen.
did in some ways with the Tim Burton, make him somewhat sympathetic in the
They
sense
did.
that his is
They were
all out of his
close.
control.
Yep.
This is all
were.
out of his control. He's under a compulsion. Now, not that he wasn't pretty
He was a Hessian.
badass,
Yeah.
nasty Hessian to
Pretty
begin
fierce.
with, with
He
his
was a Hessian.
pointy, sharpened teeth. But
Like, how did that happen? But anyway, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, that's dedication to the cause, to
Yeah.
file teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me tell
Yeah.
you. Anyway, Jeannie, what do you think is the next evolution, or should be the next evolution? We're not confined by what will be.
okay, yeah, I think what's going to be is what Susan and Bill were talking about. What I'd like to see is kind of what they did, and I'm going to refer Disney here again. Sometimes for what they did with Treasure Planet. I'd like to see this set in space. I'd like to see it set in the future, where the myths and legends are still there. We don't lose them. We never lose them. We've never lost vampires. We've never lost werewolves. We've never lost spirits. You know, we're supposedly an advanced civilization now. We're still telling each other ghost stories. So,
Why aren't you writing this, Ginny?
because I don't have time, but I will. I'm making notes as I'm talking it out
Good.
loud, right? But it is, I think, an opportunity where I think you could do something with it. Because if they can take Treasure Planet to space,
Treasure Island to space, you mean?
well,
Treasure
it's called
Planet.
Treasure Planet in the
Yeah.
Disney version. But yeah, and then yeah, I can take Ichabod to a space station.
Yeah.
Outcast Station seems tailor-made, but we won't go into that
Truly.
here. I'll let you
Truly
take that
does.
off at night at the closing. Hansi, where do you think it should go?
I want to see a really diverse cast of LGBTQA and racially diverse, and Ichabod is a woman, and I'm gonna flip it all over, make everyone like non-binary or whatever they are, you know, like I want it to be like our flag means death, like
Yes,
and that's
That
what
would
I
be fun.
want.
That would be super fun.
that would be fun.
It'd be fun. It'd be fun. Beth, what about you?
Okay, first of all, what I'm hearing is that we need to get together and do an anthology where we all do our Sleepy Hollow retellings. But I think mine
so
would,
cool.
given the popularity of all the ghost hunting shows, I want to see a modern day version where a team of ghost hunters goes to Sleepy Hollow to investigate these legends about the Headless Horseman.
Who wants to drive up to Sleepy Hollow?
It's easy.
We'll do a mockumentary.
Yes.
Love
We
it.
could do that. We could do that totally. Except
You
you
got
wouldn't
two
want
tour
me in
guides
front of the
right
camera.
here.
That's all I can say.
We can make it up as we go along.
Surely.
That would be so cool.
We can do that.
Really would be. And we've got a documentary filmmaker here, and so we can make a mockumentary. So we're good. We're good.
We've got all these great writers.
Yeah,
Make
and
it
great
so.
ideas. So much.
Instead of this
Okay.
is Spinal Tap, is this is Sleepy Hollow.
Oh my God, we're putting it together even as we speak. This is wonderful.
I'm
Okay.
in.
Well, Beth, you get to start us off in terms of we are fortunately at the end of the hour. Obviously, we need to sit and plot this movie out, but we don't get to do that on camera. And so, would you tell folks again what your most recent work is, where they can find it, which whether it be from the publisher or from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc., and where they can find you?
Sure. You can find me online at bethdolgner.com. And my current series is the Nightmare Arizona Paranormal Cozy Mysteries. So picture a tacky, touristy Wild West town with a secret supernatural population. And the fourth book in that series comes out in December. It's called Murder at the Motel.
Sounds
Sounds
wonderful.
great.
And where can they find you?
You can find my stuff on Amazon.
Yeah, but your website, socials.
BethDolgner.com, but nobody can spell my last name. So you can also just go to nightmareaz.com.
Okay, great. Jeannie.
But you can find me at jeanneadams.com. That's pretty simple. You can find me on most socials, including the weird one that is not X and it's not this and it's not that anymore. I'm still there, kind of lurking in the shadows. And you can find me here on ConTinual a whole lot. My next book is actually a short story in an anthology, the Mercedes Lackey Anything with Nothing anthology that comes out in November.
Cool. Very cool. Hansi.
I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. You can find me at Squee Projects on my website, squeeprojects.com, and Squee Projects on all TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everything. And my latest project is
The Invisible Book.
The Invisible Book. Okay, well, it's Soups Ain't Always Heroes, and it's edited by our friend Lindsay Burness and Matthew Snyder. And I have my first essay about the boys in it. It's called Blue Collar Heroes on page 92.
Okay, great.
Nice.
So that will be
Cool.
about the Sam and Dean
No,
Supernatural.
the
Oh,
boys.
the boys, the superhero thing. Okay. I keep getting those two confused. Yes.
It's Smart Pop Books, and it's also on Amazon.
Okay, great. Susan, what about you? What's the most recent work where folks can find you on the web?
You can find us at clayandsusangriffith.com. You can find us on Amazon. Most of our books are out there or on Audible. We are also, I think we're both on Blue Sky, even though Clay misspelled his name, but you can still find him very easily. I'm Susan Z. Griffith, Z as in zebra. And I'm not on Twitter as much, but always on Facebook. You can find either of us or as Clay and Susan Griffith. And we have 2 new books in the works. One is The Monstrance, about a magic in 1930s New York in the nightclub scene. And we're also working on a murder mystery with magic with a giant bear, talking bear. So
That's one
we've
does.
got
Love
that's
it.
one
Fabulous.
does.
Yes.
Sure.
So,
That's-
but
Bears.
look for those soon. One will probably be self-published, and the other probably, hopefully, traditionally published.
Cool. Very cool. I'll be looking for both of them. So anyway, Bill, what about you? What's your latest work?
You can get
yes?
my latest and only so far. My latest work is available on Amazon or at Falstaff Books, ROM. You can look me up at billmulliganbooks.com, and I got to get another book published, or that address makes no sense at all.
And
I'm
you
on
said-
Facebook and gruesomemagazine.com. You can listen to me podcasting, talking about horror movies, which is
Okay, so that's your podcast. That's what I was going to ask. Podcast is gruesomemagazine.com.
gruesomemagazine.com. Decades of Horror, the 1970s and 1980s.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Cool.
Yeah.
I think Clay will be listening on that one. I'm going to make sure he gets in on that.
Well, we're starting to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel. Although you never know. Sometimes you find some gems down there, but you also find a lot of barrel bottom.
There was
That's
a
not
lot
hard.
of barrel bottom in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot out there.
I lived through them. Yes, lots of barrel bottom.
I still love
Not all
them,
of
but
it on film. Yes. Anyway, so thank you all. You've been a great panel, and we have dissected this myth. And thank you out there in Continual Land. We really are glad you joined us tonight, and hope you'll come back again soon. Good night.